So in the next session, we're going to hear the voices of dedicated individuals who initiated social changes. So as soon as that stage is ready, I'm going to invite onto the stage the moderator, Paul Blackler, who is going to be up there in this session with three extraordinary people who are real climate change makers. And they are, Paul, if you want to come up here, Paul Blackler, and we've got Christine Amour-Levar, Selma Bichbich, and Xiao. Please give them a big round of applause.
Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us for today's panel on climate change. Like was mentioned, we've got three incredible and inspiring speakers today. The Women's Forum do an incredible job every year about bringing an amazing lineup. And today's topic is on the front line of climate change and women as agents for social progress and climate advocacy. I'm Paul Blackler. I work for Wavestone, a global consultancy supporting international clients with their critical business and tech transformations. And my personal background is in change management and coaching and leading transformation, but also around 10 years supporting female cooperatives and community development in West Africa. So I'm going to give take the privilege of a brief introduction to our three panelists so that we can get a little bit deeper into their stories as we progress. So first of all, we have Selma Bichbich, a dedicated social climate youth activist from Algeria, founded the NGO Together for Blue and Green, which is an environmental conservation and sustainability practice focus, and is also co-founder of the MENA Youth Network, which amplifies diversified voices across the MENA region. So welcome, Selma. We also have Christine Amour-Levar, who is a French-Swiss-Filipina social entrepreneur, philanthropist, and climate investor. She's founded two NGOs, Women on a Mission and Her Planet Earth, and has won several accolades, including the GGEF Women Eco Game Changer Award and Women of the Future Southeast Asia Leading Lights Financial Times. So welcome, Christine. And then we also have with us today Xiao. If I'm correct, that means cloud. That's correct. Beautiful name. So Xiao Neo is a Singapore-based environmental advocate and wildlife educator at the Untamed Paths, which supports all of us the opportunity to take educational adventures to explore biodiversity right here in Singapore. One of her highlights is sighting the elusive Salanga mud snake, which was last seen in Singapore in 1918. And that's fascinating. One of the privileges of being a moderator is diving deeper into the bios. So thank you for joining us. I think we'll kickstart with the first question and perhaps start on the far side, if that's okay, with Xiao. Could you share a little bit more about your engagement on climate crisis, the issues surrounding it, and perhaps what initially inspired you to get involved in this area?
Yeah, so for me, I think in densely built up Singapore, nature-inspired spaces are hard to come by, and there's a certain disentanglement and disconnection from nature for all of us who are urban dwellers. So I think, children are more used to classroom learning, and outdoor learning is not that much practice. And what we want to do is to make such experiences available to everybody. And beyond children, actually, our walks are catering to all ages. So it's actually about getting people more aware about the various biodiversity that still thrives in our remaining ecosystems, from our intertidal pools to our rainforests to our mangrove habitats. And so this organization that I co-lead called the Untamed Paths focuses on providing such experiential learning, right? So we do things in a very unique way. We kind of bring in the guests and bring them along the journey with us, the journey of seeking, learning how to spot animals and learning their names. So all these so that when people think about wildlife in Singapore, they don't think about the zoo. They actually think about naturally occurring wildlife in our environments. I noticed my title, my designation reflects my day job. Yeah, my day job is as a civil servant. And secondarily, I also partnered the National Parks Board of Singapore to be the co-host, not co-host, of a podcast called That's Wild. And that allows people to learn about these biodiversity and wildlife issues in Singapore. Yeah, so.
And can you remember a single point that you felt, no, this is a career choice for me or a path to follow?
I think for me, and this is also why I'm so motivated to continue to do this, is because I was personally exposed in all my years of childhood to all these nature places. They were where I grew up in, so I think a lot of the farms in Choa Chu Kang, the zoo was where I grew up in, and so nature reserves. So, and I think throughout the years, I slowly got exposed. So I watched Al Gore's documentary when I was 10, and I was so scared, didn't know what to do. I didn't have an emotional impetus pushing me forward. I just told my parents to turn off the lights, but there was no personal motivation. And then because of the huge amount of problems, I slowly distanced myself from it. But it was only when I turned 17 that I went on a life-changing field trip to Bhutan, which is a small landlocked Himalayan country. And then I realized that I do have a personal connection with nature. It's where I feel the most spiritually connected because I'm a free thinker. So I feel like, I have a connection with nature and I want to do what I can to help everybody also reconnect and re-entangle with nature. Yeah, so I think that it was a long journey and it started more significantly 10 years ago.
And you're clearly taking a lot of families and children on these educational journeys, opening them up to environmental conservation. Is there something particularly proud or an impact that you're seeing through that work?
I would say that every walk is different because not just the families that I engage with, we do it in a very small participant to guide ratio, so 1:5, 1:6. And so I really get to know what are the entryways that I can use, different talking points, what do they care about that I can then link this biodiversity to what they care about, because climate change is a big issue and I believe there are various entryways to talk about it. So for instance, if they care about seafood, I can talk about how is climate change affecting their seafood. And so, I feel like every walk is significant, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And same for you, Christine. What's drawn you to the climate change and any particular career highlights?
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here on this panel, such an honor. So for me, the journey really began when I understood that economic crisis, violence, climate change was impacting the vulnerable. It came at a very young age for me. So I was born and raised in the Philippines, and I was very lucky to grow up in a loving home. I had a good roof over my head. I had a chance at a good education, but I was aware very early on that the majority of the people in the Philippines didn't have those privileges. It's one of the poorest countries in our region, and every time a crisis hit, it was always the poorest that were most impacted, including when we were rocked by natural disasters. So it's one of the most prone countries in the region. We have floods, earthquakes, typhoons, and it was really heartbreaking to see it. The realization came to me when I went to live in France, my father's country, and came back when I was 5, and was picked up by my family, my Philippine family, from the airport, driven across town, and I saw children just my age in the slums, and that there was a real sense of injustice. So I think it really stemmed very early on, and I was feeling very powerless. I didn't know what to do. My mother tried to involve us in charitable initiatives very early on, but there was only so much one could do. Growing up, I had a passion for sports, so that was the big part of my early career, was in sports marketing across the world. I worked for Nike, came to Singapore with Nike, and it was only about 12.5 years ago that I had a pivotal moment when I realized that I could use my passion for sports and adventure to have an impact and to raise awareness and funds for charities and organizations that were helping the most vulnerable. And we started first with supporting charities, helping women survivors of war, domestic abuse, human trafficking. And then my realization led to then continue to support other charities through my second NGO, Her Planet Earth, with more of an environmental lens. Because again, I realized that women were most impacted by changes in the weather, and especially in our part of the world, in Asia and some parts of Africa, women hold the majority of the agricultural roles. As men go to the cities to look for work, they are most exposed. But what the wonderful thing was, I also realized that one of the best ways to help the world, to have an impact, was to help a woman. And you help a woman, you help her family, you help her community, and you help a nation. So I've been trying to focus on that for many years in my own small way, obviously taking all-female teams on expeditions, being an advocate, talking about the issues, and raising funds for good organizations that do work that help the livelihoods of women in this space.
Incredibly inspiring, thank you. I look forward to digging deeper into that. Selma, same question for you. Your inspiration points and your career highlights.
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It has been an honor really to represent, I guess, Youth Voice here. Honestly, the journey that I started really got inspired by the elderlies, which is why I always somehow always advocate for supporting our ancestors' thoughts, especially when it comes to like taking these practices, whether when advocating for agricultural sector or for advocating for climate change in general as activists, which is something I also addressed yesterday in the plenary. Honestly, when I first started, I wanted always to have my own thing that is implemented. I wanted always to take actions and not just like leave everything as drafted or said words. Because again, it's not always about talking the talk and addressing it in such conferences, but it's more of what should come after this talk, you know, after these words that are already drafted, as I said. So I wanted to leave my own touch in my community, something that is grassroots, something that relates to youth mainly, especially that when there's no mindset for activism or for advocacy for climate change. We know that environment is one of the, I would say it's a global concern that is mainly affecting the global south. And we're seeing that countries still now are still being, like, are incredibly affected with this, and still not so much is done. As you mentioned, this, like, most of the funding goes for prioritizing other economic issues rather than environment protection, which is still a problem because we're always addressing this in spoken words. So this just like made me always think, so what if I want to leave my own thing for my own community? So each one needs to kind of step in somehow, and we cannot keep always somehow, let's say, blame the governments and just you need to apply and do, but also from our side, there is like this one duty that needs somehow to push us for us to take our own actions on the ground. So I founded this small initiative dedicated, all youth-led, called Together for Blue and Green. And we had the chance to just like simplify first the term climate change to youth and somehow introduce them to what is this environmental conservation all about? What is it like to be an activist? Because people sometimes think that you need an academic background in order for you to be an activist. And that's so wrong. And that's actually, I'm also sometimes linking it back to the media because they're not somehow like introducing people to what is it exactly that is happening in the global south or in the world, why there is this climate change, why there is COPs being hosted every year, even though they keep on calling it a failing COP, but it's still being hosted. So somehow these questions needs to be somehow raised and pushed and helped by the media as well as the activists. So I just wanted to clarify and wanted to simplify what is happening exactly in the world to youth activists and somehow motivate them with the best I can for them to do better initiatives, which can be also taken on the ground. So my first purpose was always to push for the implementation rather than just keeping everything as written or spoken words. Because honestly, we're sick of that. And it's not really working and it's not doing much. And then after that, we also had this regional network that you mentioned, MENA Youth Network, that me and a group of climate delegates in the MENA region from different countries. We were 5 delegates from the Middle East and North Africa. And we had the honor to create this network for youth in the region for us to keep on having these negotiations that we had in the Youth for Climate Summit and in the global international conferences that we usually have. And because it was so unfair sometimes to see that we were like jealous because, you know, the Europeans had their own youth council and same for Africa and the US, but the MENA region didn't have anything as always. So we wanted to somehow leave a space for youth, just for them to interact, to know what is exactly happening, why we are this problematic region, why so much is going on, why nothing is taken. And we really raised so many questions that we wanted to somehow figure out how can we handle this. First, in words and then written, and then we'll see where we can go with that. However, like we're somehow like really creating this space made us do great work because we were able to voice up the challenges that are happening in the region, and we also had the chance to address so many of these challenges that are happening at the grassroots level while implementing initiatives in there. So somehow it's just a way for me to say that don't really underestimate this kind of small networks that are usually being created out of this tiny local conferences that we're having.
Great. I get a sense from all of you. It's been around learning from the environment around you and then taking agency, a little bit of accountability, opening up other people's minds, but also driving action. So thanks for sharing that. We know that, and it's already been covered, that women are disproportionately affected by climate change. The term was mentioned before as a threat multiplier, so worsening the already existing inequalities. And women are at greater risk within this region where over 100 million people are already affected by climate change annually. So I just wonder, as the theme is also around education today, and how education can empower women and girls on the front line of climate change, what specific skills, experience, knowledge do you think is important to empower women and girls through education to kind of support this movement and deliver action?
Okay, that's a very good question, honestly, because I remember also when I first was selected for my first international conference was the Youth for Climate Summit, and I was the female representative there, and I had the chance to interact with high-level, somehow, decision and policy makers, and the first thing we emphasized on was education. In fact, we even like created a toolkit on how can we spread that and focus on education, on educating people on climate change in our curriculum, on our curriculums. So because like if I link it back to my region, we don't see really youth being so educated on how can they serve their community. It's like more of just, that educational background that will vanish one day. It's not about the practical side of it. It's just how we can keep it theoretical, and yes, we just taught that and that's it. But we don't want to see this anymore. So like we're not really seeing much of that being involved, honestly, in my region specifically. However, when it comes to empowering women, and thanks for bringing this up, because I am currently working on a project with Girls Rising. It's an American NGO, and I had the chance to be one of their fellows, and I'm now working on a project that is called MENA Youth Female Climate Activist Storytellings, in which I somehow I will be shaping all the stories of female climate activists who fought for their challenges and who were able to voice them up, starting from very simple, using simple tools, starting all locally, and also like sometimes even starting online. These young female climate activists were like so inspiring, and their stories like will be told to the next generations for them to somehow get inspired and do the same in their communities. And that was so simple by just educating others, by having summits in their and forums in their universities, as we're having somehow now. I mean, like we're talking about international forum that was brought into an academic university, and that's a great example for somehow females and women to learn from such initiatives that can be implemented at a very simple way at the grassroots level. So this was like something somehow that inspires women, and at the same time can support this intergenerational dialogue.
So finding the channels around you, inspiring, providing role models, and finding new ways to engage. You mentioned online. So Christine, are there specific skills you would highlight?
Of course. I mean, education is such a key part in uplifting women in particular, not just from poverty, but of course making them agents of change, leadership roles, especially in the climate space. We need much more of that support going to education. But even as activists ourselves, whatever age you are, educating yourself. I mean, my journey with sustainability only started about 12 years ago with my NGO, and that opened up my whole world in trying to understand, working with our charity partners, what are the issues on the ground. So educating yourselves constantly, not just taking courses that are available, but actually working with stakeholders, partners, learning at the grassroots level, learning from indigenous people, people has been a huge part of the journey, and I think that will stay with all of us, for a lifetime. We can't make progress without investing in our own education and, of course, supporting programs that build the education capacity across many developing countries in particular.
Great. And are there specific skills and opportunities that you're seeing in Singapore specifically?
I think for myself, I was fortunate to be able to be initiated in environmental work and advocacy through my school. So I was locally educated. I went to UNS College, which is the first liberal arts college in Singapore. Unfortunately closed down. But when I was 19, I started working with lots of mentors and teammates and friends from both the club, the sustainability club. Later, I headed the club. And also, I had so many professors. You could just knock on their doors and go in and ask. It's mostly male-dominated professors, but they were really making themselves available during office hours. And in journeying with me and modeling the way, teaching me various perspectives, giving me readings to do or amending my essays, I think I found community and something larger than life, such that it has become part of my identity. And so I think we need to replicate this same journey for all these girls, right? Giving them opportunity and mentorships to go through a similar process whereby then, environmental work becomes part of their identity and they see it as an extension of themselves to continue to do this day to day.
And a topic that often comes up is this sort of eco-anxiety. It's such a complex challenge, and when we are trying to continuously educate ourselves, continuously expose ourselves to some of these challenges, there is a lot of anxiety involved. So any advice that you would give the audience around how best to manage that?
I think for myself, there's this term that the climate scientist Catherine Wilkerson term. It's called climate ikigai. So you try to ask yourself, ikigai, the Japanese concept of finding yourself in the intersection of 4 circles, and you find yourself in the center of the Venn diagram. So you ask, where do you come from? What are your identities and communities? What brings you joy? What are you good at? And what needs to be done in the world? So, let us not shame ourselves and be consumed by guilt, but let us focus on what we can do. So where do you stand? What can you do right now within your 4 circles? And I think for me, I often also ask myself, climate change and the whole problem is so big, the collapse of ecosystems is so big, we're overshooting planetary capacities in 4 of 9 boundaries. But at the same time, all these little initiatives, they matter, because even if we sort of fail, what is our barometer of failure? I think any step that we do, if it just slows the whole trajectory, it will help. And more importantly, even if we fail, all these initiatives, they bring us joy as we do them. They bring us community and they bring us each other. So I think, even if we fail, along the way of failure, we had fun and we brought others along with us. So to me, that is not failure.
I just wanted to add that, I, like many people, I'm sure in this room, have eco-anxiety. I'm a mommy of 4. So, when we think about the future of our children, we worry about it. I never had to worry about that when I was younger. But like what you were just saying, Xiao, it's that active hope. I call it active hope, and that's why I'm trying to fire on as many cylinders as possible. So beyond my 2 NGOs, I also set up a company called Investors for Climate last year to rally more capital towards innovative solutions in the climate tech space. It's my way of being active and showing leadership there. Board roles, as well, both at the nonprofit and for-profit space, focus on climate tech in particular, in VC space. I feel that their urgency is so strong that unless I take action in any capacity I can, with whatever skills I have, then it really overwhelms me. So for me, this is my solution, is to keep working wherever I can in any area where I have an influence and a chance to contribute. Because I think, as you said, it's going to take all of us to rally the skills, the passion that we have, the drive, the opportunities in any capacity to have an impact and to try to move the needle in the right direction.
Honestly, I just wanted to mention something that I just remembered. This year, I am one of the World Food Forum's policy board members, where we will be focusing this year specifically. We decided to focus on having policies that are more dedicated for women involvement in the agricultural sector, but this time more tech-wise and more somehow. How can we support women to be more involved in coming up with new ideas and projects that are innovative and can serve the sector that used to be and still be owned by women, especially in Africa, where my country is as well. We see women are so involved in the sector, and this just like really inspired me that we're seeing that women did a great job and still are being supported to somehow develop it, but this time somehow give a new narrative to the coming generations that they can always change in this kind of sectors that are being completely neglected, and it's us who is doing this. So this made me always somehow think of like being there to support each other and somehow always address that what we can do can be always made in a better way. This like something that I wanted just to mention, just for us as a generation to always somehow aim for the best and be always there to change things up and add that one touch that can make it better.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
You've all clearly got positive growth mindsets, and I think it's important to look after each other, and we can sometimes do that through community. And I get a sense of that in Singapore. The climate community is growing. Any thoughts on Singapore and Asia in terms of the community? Any advice on how people can get involved, specifically for closing this disparity gap for women?
I mean, I would like to add that Singapore, we are, as you know, a small island. We have an existential threat that is very real. So one of my clients is actually the Earth Observatory at NTU. I took a team of scientists recently to do research on the Antarctic ice sheet, because we are so aware of the risks at the equator level, especially of sea level rise. It impacts the whole region, in fact. So I think the awareness is growing. A lot of the ecosystem has been growing. The government is very supportive of finding support and investments and grants for innovative companies. ESG hubs are popping up. It's really, really hopeful to see the movement that is growing. So I think we're very lucky, if you're working in climate in Singapore, to have this energy around you, this sense of hope and action. But the threats is also very real. So sometimes when you go to Europe, you feel a little bit more removed maybe from the actual, the typhoons that are hitting our shores, etc. So I think it's a double-edged sword in many ways. On one side, it's quite frightening what's happening in our region, and we're this part of the world has contributed probably the least to the causes of climate change, but will be the most impacted. Once again, it's going to be the most vulnerable. We can expect over 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. It's going to impact all our borders. So that urgency is very real, and yet the ecosystem is growing, and many of us can look through the corporates that we work for, in the community, the clubs, the organizations, the women's groups, etc., to rally together to see what we can do to volunteer. So there are many opportunities to do it, and thank God, because that's what can move us and give us hope. Without action, there's no hope, really.
Amazing. Xiao?
Yeah, actually I agree. I think since I started on this journey, the movement has been growing, right? So I'm 28 this year. So when I first joined, when I first went into university, it was in 2015, and back then I think I was the minority. And I think in 2018, when we were told that we only had 12 more years to contain, by 2030 to contain and bend the curve towards mitigating the rise of temperature by 1.5 degrees, right? I think that was when I saw the urgency pick up. And since then, this movement in Singapore has grown. And as a youth, I've seen like many circles of care. I think mainly, there are lots of organizations working on it, both profit and non-profit, and it's growing. But I guess my concern will mostly be just that sometimes there's a mindset of kind of just keeping Singapore's borders safe and just looking inwards, or just looking at security for the nation in terms of say food security or energy security, and not really thinking of implications for our neighbors. So I think that's the concern that I do have, and it's something that we have to grapple with, to also still be respectful of our neighbors' needs to be safe themselves from environmental crisis. Yeah.
I would like to add one thing. I had the chance a few years ago to work as a consultant for 5 years for Temasek Trust, which is the philanthropic arm of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And that actually opened my eyes to what you were just sharing, that actually there is a long-term vision that Singapore and its neighbors, ASEAN neighbors, are really working in parallel together, which really gave me, again, a lot of hope. So the Temasek Trust in particular works across multiple countries in the region, helping them grow their resilience and strength. And it's a very, very long-term view, which is quite reassuring to see that Singapore has played such a role in hosting not just the youth in the region, but also contributing and investing, co-investing with local governments in water purification programs in Rajasthan, in earthquake infrastructure building in the Philippines, in the upscaling of nurses in Indonesia. I saw that with my own eyes because I was working in the space, and that really allowed me to see that even though sometimes we feel that we are very protective in Singapore of our communities, there is actually much more work being done behind the scenes. And it's quite incredible to see the dedication that Singapore has for its neighbors, in fact. So that was very inspiring for me to understand.
Maybe just to quickly add, even though I'm not from here, not from Singapore, but what I have noticed in my participation at COP28, I have noticed how somehow your policymakers really pushing for the environmental agenda and how they are really considering, they're being considerative of what may happen because they know that this country is being really threatened when it comes to the climate impact. So somehow suggesting a new, somehow, let's say, new alternative solutions for how they can somehow tackle this, this kind of challenges that Singapore is going through. Like it's already a step that is being taken, adding, of course, to the role of civil society that was also pushing so hard for this kind of agendas and how they can take it to the practical side rather than just leaving it as demands or recommendations at the high level. So that's based on the observation I had.
It's great to hear from different perspectives, external view and internal that's closer. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to bring us back shortly to the specific skills and strengths that women traditionally hold that can be leveraged against climate adaptation. Yeah, thoughts on that and from your kind of career highlights?
I'm happy to share. Over the last 12 years, I've had the great privilege to take hundreds of women on expeditions across the world, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and many times we had the opportunity to meet indigenous people, indigenous women in particular, traveling with them, learning about how they care for their families, how they care for the earth. And I've learned a lot. I actually wrote a whole book about it during the pandemic called Wild Wisdom. And it's, again, very inspiring to see. I can give you some examples. You know, when we were traveling in Siberia with Nenet reindeer herders in the middle of winter with their 10,000 reindeer, men and women had very specific roles. Women have skills that they pass down from generation on how to survive in the face of very harsh weather. How to feed themselves with very little. When you go to the Andes, you see ways of agriculture that women pass down from generation of how to cultivate in high altitudes with a series of ways of terracing, and also how they alternate the crops to keep the land fertile. There are many other examples in Mongolia. The relationship that women have with the earth is of pure respect. They never look at the mountain as something to conquer. It's something to pass on and steward for generations to come. So there's so much that we all can learn, and I'm constantly learning from mixing and traveling and meeting indigenous people. And women have this beautiful role in society and those indigenous tribes in society to pass on those stories. And that's why I'm such an advocate for having indigenous women in leadership roles in the climate space, because we can learn so much from them as well.
Incredible. And was it Wild Wisdom? Is it published?
Wild Wisdom, published by Penguin a couple of years ago.
Okay, I have to check that one out. That sounds great.
Maybe I think I'll speak about like a culture of care. So I think there needs to be a culture of care, and I hope that this is not just a woman-only skill but it should be embodied in our movement culture, so that we're not just like working all the time and grinding ourselves to the bone, but also like taking time to care for ourselves. And again, this shouldn't be a female-only reminder to care for yourself.
Thank you.
I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to keep it short. Maybe for me, honestly, again, in COP28, I have seen how maybe the indigenous people really advocating for their, mainly I'm focused on the agricultural side, how they were advocating for their practices that they had the chance to even transfer to Europe. And I'm talking about the indigenous people of Latin America. So this was actually so inspiring to transmit this knowledge and speak out about it, that it was transmitted and it was really benefiting this kind of, these communities, these overseas communities. And one more thing was when I learned what I learned from the agriculture summer school, where I had the chance to interact with elderlies and learn a lot from them somehow, especially the women practices in terms of keeping up with this agriculture sector and make it more somehow dominant by women, which has been the case in some countries already. So this was like really inspiring, and keeping on these traditional practices made me realize that we will not lose culture. So I have to always stick to that happily.
Brilliant. Thank you all for your insights, experience and inspiration. I've certainly learned a lot. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
So much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.